Just to introduce myself again, my name is Michaela Vendiola. I'm the tribal liaison for North Sound ACH, and I'll be the panel moderator today. If we can go through just quickly, and please introduce yourself and where you're coming from. And let's just start with that question. And we'll start here.
Good morning, everyone. Just another call out to Remy for that incredible film. So I'm still processing about what that means for measurement. My name is JanMarie Ward. I'm a lineal descendant of San Ynez and Barbareño, California Mission Indians, contemporarily known as Chumash. I've lived here in the Pacific Northwest for over 46 years, and much of that time have worked with the tribes here in Washington State, and of course stay very connected to my own home territory and the things that go on there. I have worked with the American Indian Health Commission for the last 13 years, and have been very involved in work that's relevant to what we're talking about today.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Michaela, and so grateful to be able to be sitting here with JanMarie and with Matt today in this conversation around measurement. My name's Stacy Wegley, pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you all from the Midwest. I'm a part of both the Community Initiatives team and the IP3 team, which helps bring the resource library to the network. And we're a distributed network, so where I am sitting in Cincinnati, Ohio, my dear friend Monty is in Portland, and Aaron from our IP3 team is in Columbia, Missouri, so always grateful to be learning with you all. Monty and I, in our community-facing work, are so blessed to be able to walk with communities, to be able to pursue some of these questions around well-being, and to be able to better understand who's thriving, struggling, and suffering, and pair that with the vital conditions data, those conditions that give rise often in our structures and community context to our opportunities for thriving, and grateful to be a part of that conversation here in the North Sound.
And again, I'm Matt for like the third time this convening. Yeah, so I work in kind of data and program evaluation for the ACH, which is a newer field for me. I have a previous background in direct service, working in a community action agency in Bellingham. Mostly working with everybody in the community, especially during COVID, but primarily focused on folks who are experiencing homelessness or fleeing domestic violence. And I think that informs a lot of kind of my ideas, my thoughts around measuring well-being and data, and how we can use that to actually help to lift people up, and not just ask a couple more questions and have one more data point that just doesn't necessarily go anywhere. So that's kind of the background that is behind me as I think about kind of this topic.
Thank you. Please tell us why you're interested in the topic of measuring well-being in your community. And we'll start on the end again with you.
Oh, well, I don't think we have enough time for me to talk about this. Certainly from my own personal experience and from my history, in much thinking about really culture and how even from a very early time, there was a realization for me that culture was really so much at the heart of being healthy. And yet I didn't see that it showed up in places. And I mean, I was, looking at this from a very, I was in grammar school and going, okay, So I love culture. Where is it? Anyway, and so I would say that it was what originally prompted me in the very early stage of life. But as I continued on in my role in the work that I did, I worked for legal services for many years and was focused on serving people that were experiencing poverty and dealt with issues of housing issues and income issues and dealing with the welfare system and domestic and family issues and all of those things, and some of those, seeing the patterns and cycles, and then put relevance to that in terms of overall health, and started down this path. But so many influences from people that were out in tribal communities that were bringing culture in to healing circles, talking circles, and thinking about is this the path for restoring some of these things that have been damaged over over history. So that's really early on, but that was what was the impetus for my involvement in this way.
I think one of the things for myself, both personally, my background is in public health before joining the community initiatives team, and all too often we collected loads of data, and as Monty shared, in a much more unfortunately extractive way that never was returned to the community, particularly in meaningful ways. And what Monty and I have seen through our work in partnership with a number of communities who have taken up the work of understanding who's thriving, struggling, and suffering through the well-being measure, and have paired that with the vital conditions, that there's just the opportunity to have such a richer understanding of where we are and where we start. We also have deep appreciation for the measure in the fact that it starts with individual voice, just as it did for you in this room today. That opportunity to say for yourself where your well-being is, how you're feeling now, what your perceptions and hopes and how your experience informs what you're anticipating for your future. We also appreciate that it's a very catalytic measure. So often data, again, is collected and sits on a shelf or in a series of spreadsheets. But through the use of the well-being data, it brings to life a series of community conversations. What is well-being? What does that mean to me, to us? What are things that support our well-being? What are things that hinder our well-being? And what might we create together? And we have found most powerful when paired with a series of community dialogues and conversations where we're listening deeply to one another about those responses and those experiences, so that we can lift up and illuminate the stories behind those numbers.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably going to end up echoing some of what you've already heard. I know my interest in this comes from, like I said, I kind of come from a direct service background, and just talking to hundreds and hundreds, and probably in the thousands, honestly, of people over the years, and just hearing stories, kind of hearing what's going on with them, talking to them. As we're filling out intake paperwork or just having a conversation, figuring out what folks need. It's easy to ask the wrong questions, I feel like. And I think that's where a lot of my interest in this comes, is how can we ask the right questions to really get at what is going to what we can do as service providers, as a community to really lift up and support the folks that we're serving, to give them a voice and an avenue to really lift that up. I mean, the amount of times I can think, like, you run through these questions, but I annotate it with like 10 or 15 sticky notes. Like, I know this is, we're not quite capturing the full picture of someone's story. And folks know themselves the best. How can we kind of implement that in some of our measurement? It's the storytelling part of it. I know I said I work a lot in spreadsheets and Excel, and that's fun. But where that really, the qualitative stuff, the stories, people's lives, I think that's what's behind all the stuff in the spreadsheet, and that, I think, is what really excites me and speaks to me. So.
Thank you. This question is for JanMarie. What are the unique values emphasized in some of the Indigenous indicator work that tends to be missing in other measurement frameworks? And then part 2 of that, where do you see the opportunities for weaving Indigenous indicator values with the well-being and vital conditions?
Okay, I'm going to start this off at a little bit of a different point, but and this really has to do with, here and now. If we're measuring here and now and moving forward, that's a really different journey than saying, let's put historical and cultural context around where we came from, what our experiences have been. And when I say ours, I mean not only here and now, our ancestral experience. And that's really important in order to really do that deep level work that is not just addressing the social conditions of today, but redressing and restoring and healing from the histories that have caused harm to many of our Indigenous people and other communities. And so that's a different place to start. So I'd say that much. Another factor in terms of values is that issues around the discrimination and race and how that plays into the social policy and environmental context of what our conditions are today, our vital conditions are today, is important to understand. And the only way that we can understand that is from hearing the stories of the people. And so that's why Remy's example, I wasn't here yesterday, but I'm sure that you guys talked about story then too, is so powerful. How do you develop measures to remedy the situations that one individual can experience that impacts them down to the core? And so I think that's really important for us to think about. I think about some of the racist policies in this country that were the formative policies of this country that were set out to exterminate Indigenous people. And that's important to acknowledge. It doesn't mean that that's where we are today, but it's part of our histories. My great-grandfather was at the Presidio when they raised the American flag. His friend was instructed to, or asked by the soldiers, to climb a pole and hang the flag. And that boy fell to his death. They were about 9 years old. Now, that story is a very powerful story to me, and I think about it all the time. I think about my great-grandfather's experience all the time. I carry it with me. And I would say that that is relative to this thinking about the 7-generation principle, is that we look back to the generations before us, at least 3 generations, and that's our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and what was their experience. And we take those experiences and also the wisdom and the strength and the resilience that those people carried to ensure that we were able to survive, and carry those forward in our thinking, in our planning for our future generations, for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. And I know it extends way beyond that in terms of, our lineages, but there's where, and Vine Deloria Jr. spoke about this, who is a Native scholar, now passed on since 2005, but has had an impact all across Indian country in such an astonishing ways, where he's talked about the reach, that if we are so fortunate enough to have that longevity of life, we will have had physical presence with our great-grandparents, maybe not all of them, but even if we haven't, we usually know the stories. And then the same thing in our younger generations. We generally have those relationships, or hope to, and I know I hope to, but that we carry with us, and we carry those stories with us on a daily basis. When we're thinking about those generations, not just me, myself, and I today. And so that's a value. That's an important value. So then there's certainly many other values that are that go beyond just, how we show up in the world, and that reciprocity that we need to have in community, like here. And this is the second time that I've been asked to come and join this group, and last time I was, just felt so welcome and really impressed. And this time, the same thing. I can see you all are working in a different way, and I just so appreciate that. But reciprocity with community, and also with how we show up in the world and the imprint that we have on our environment. Can I leave it at that for this? Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And I want to apologize. We have your slides. Matt, do you want to progress the slides here? JanMarie, I don't know if anything that you want to talk about specifically is from that. Do you have?
Yeah.
Right there. There you go.
So here is the Pulling Together for Wellness framework. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things from the framework. Do you mind if I stand?
No? Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So I can see it. First of all, you can see in the core of this framework, we are using a medicine wheel there. And in the center is culture. And this is work that was guided by tribal leaders here in the state, and this is the work that I've been involved in really 12, 13 years. And I would say even before that, but officially 12, 13 years. That they were very clear that culture needed to be central, that culture is connected to all parts of health. And that you can see down below that we call generational clarity, and that's the healing work. And so, once acknowledging the above and culture's importance, that we were looking at all of these issues that impacted our ability to achieve that whole health, that picture of whole health. And so there's elements that were mentioned earlier, about historical trauma and racism and the effects of the inequitable systems and structures that have developed over time, and many other things that are packed in there. That is a work in and of itself. But a couple of things that you'll see over in the components of this framework is that storytelling is called out as an important factor. Bringing together the elders and the cultural people to be part of this is really important in this process. And then let's go to the next slide. And then here's that 7-generation concept. So when we think about, setting out a vision and goals of where we want to be, we also know that we have to have some indicators of, okay, where are we now? And that's really, I think that's really an important question too, because, it's only been a short period of time that sort of that broader practitioners in public health have thought beyond just the hard data, hard numbers. And even those hard numbers are really open for interpretation. As we began to talk about decolonizing data, as we began to talk about who's left out of the data, who's collecting the data, are they the right questions, who's left out, all of those questions are really part of that. Where are we now, right? And then, that vision of where do we want to be, where do we want to get to, and how do we create the right terminology to really set that path out. And then we, use that 7-generation principle of looking back to the experience, in order to plan forward. And I'm really using, one of our really phenomenal leaders, Billy Frank, who has impacted the work of so many people in this state, but certainly across the country and beyond, so many incredible things could be said about Billy, but his teachings, he left with us to continue to practice. And one of them is that Billy never forgot the kids. He was always supportive of the kids and making sure that he made time to have that direct relationship. And so you see the older population engaged in setting out courses, the younger populations that are involved in some of the activities, and then the little ones. And the little one over here on this side is my granddaughter, Jayla Okush, which is Otter in Chumash. And so those are just some of the concepts, and I know they're broad because we're not getting down into the detailed specifics. We have a whole sheet of values that were developed through the guidance of tribal leaders here in the state, and I'd be glad to share those with you. And I'm even at another point coming back and talking about more in detail about those, but just, really important, again, because they were developed through the guidance of tribal leaders here in this state, tribal and urban leaders. Oh, let's see, do I have another slide? Yes. Supporting, here's the document, supporting culturally grounded values. And then one more slide. And this is just important because this is an image that, this is in Chumash territory. And how many people have been to Santa Barbara, California? Quite a few, right? Or of it, right? So I'm from Santa Barbara, right? And that's Chumash territory all along that coastline there and into the San Joaquin Valley. But there were about five bands of Chumash people that came together to create this image and actually build this mosaic that is down on the beach, on the main strip along the beach. And it's beautiful, and you can see the Tamil canoe. And every year there is a crossing out to the islands from the mainland in recognition of our ancestors. And you can see, lots of elements here, but I think that I wanted to share with you about this in particular is it's a story circle. And this 5 bands came together and continued to tell stories with each other all the way through this. But, you know, people walk by this and they say, wow, that's beautiful. What, they have no idea what it is, right? I mean, maybe someone will stop and look at the marker, but because, anyway, you can imagine why. That the histories get lost, they get covered up. You know, this was only in, I don't know, 2000-something, 2006, that it was installed. And that area is a village site. So, anyway.
Take weed seed, thank you. Yeah, I always love to hear the names of our ancestors and relatives that came before. You know, I have a lot of respect for Billy Frank Jr. and Vine Deloria Jr. If you don't know who those people are, you should know who they are. So look them up. Haishka, JanMarie. So, Stacy, this question is for you, and we have your slides as well. You have done a lot of work with measuring well-being in our communities, such as Imagine Fox Cities in Wisconsin. Can you share how those communities are pairing the well-being measures with storytelling and meaning-making?
Thanks, Michaela. I'd be so delighted to. I'm grateful to be able to share their story today, and we do have some imagery from their work, and community story, I believe, is always best told in first person, so I'm grateful that they're both written and multimedia pieces that will go more in depth and we'll have time for today within your all's resource library. So look forward to sharing, and Monty and I love talking about the work as well, so feel free to grab one of us if you have additional questions as we go forward today in the hallway or at tables or otherwise. And as Liz said yesterday, sometimes short and being brief is harder to do. So I do have a handful of notes that I may hit because anyway, hitting the highlights with some brevity will be my goal for us collectively today. Imagine Fox Cities, just to kind of set us in place really quickly, is in somewhat sort of north-central Wisconsin. It's a group of municipalities that are contiguous to one another, rural areas, suburban areas, about 45 minutes south of Green Bay, but does not include Green Bay. And the largest of the cities there is Appleton, Wisconsin, which is a beautiful city, rich in arts, as that region is, rich in green space and other natural resources. The community or region has shifted, like many around the country, as they were heavy manufacturing and in particular paper mills, many of which have closed. So there's been, over the last 2 decades, a pretty significant shift in the economies within the region. And like most of our communities, in the best of ways as well, they're growing in diversity. And in that particular area, a growing number of Hmong communities and Hispanic communities. The conversation that became Imagine Fox Cities really began over a cup of coffee between a community elder and steward and his mentee, who was in population health at the hospital. And the conversation began in a different way, which is, what would things look like if we in the Fox Cities region began to take more of a generational view of our work? What decisions, what might we prioritize, what might we do differently and invest in if we were no longer working strictly from the calendar or the next fiscal cycle? And those two individuals grew the table through conversation, sort of seeding this question, is, what would we do differently and how might we create that together? And as that table grew, Monty and I were just grateful to be invited to be a part of that conversation. And as they started to think about understanding where they were in an opportunity to create anew together, they realized that, of course, those who were around the table had much data. I mean, the hospital was there, the community foundation was there, a number of community nonprofits and other service providers, but they knew that if this were to be meaningful, it really needed to be informed by the community at large. And they moved forward then with an almost year-long process of discovery using both the Wellbeing Survey as well as a series of community conversations. The Wellbeing Survey included the questions that you all had the opportunity to respond to this morning, but it also asked additional questions around isolation and sense of purpose, as well as social supports, and a variety of open-ended questions. Those surveys were, shared through work sites and community libraries, at community festivals and cultural events, through faith-based groups, outreach to, second shift workers and others. And through the process of sharing and working on collecting the well-being surveys from across the community, it was also really intentionally being woven and stitched together through a series of building new connections and new relationships as they worked out from their circles and with new connections and friends over the course of time to really be able to make sure they were reaching and able to include those voices that are so often underheard within community. As they were doing this work, they also then worked at hosting a series of community conversations. And when that work started, as in many places, and through, reflected in many of the stories you all have been sharing, they thought that they might do a dozen community conversations or 18, and they, knew that that would still be insufficient, for the reach within community. And they engaged and enrolled community members, volunteers, nonprofits, again, cultural groups, and through the conversation, just, the momentum and relationship both that started, to take shape. And when they were, I say complete, the process is never complete, and we'll talk about that a bit. But at the end of sort of their pause point to reflect at sort of what had been heard to date, they had over 3,000 community surveys, which is way more than Gallup collects in any particular, neighborhood or region. And they had done over 80 community conversations where people sat, again, in the room listening to, what does well-being mean to you? What has been your experience? What is getting in the way of your well-being? What can we do together to ensure that that looks different for our children and our grandchildren? All of that information, you can imagine the amount of data, and the picture in the center there reflects a community room. Again, at every step, working to be as transparent and as open as they could as they, learn together in this space. Each thought, each idea that was shared in the open-ended questions through the community surveys and the notes that were collected and gathered during the community conversation, each got its own Post-it. And those Post-its over the series of several weeks from some of the community stewards who had been helping, through some of the intermediaries, through some of the folks who had been doing the community conversations, began theming those words and voices and asks and experiences of the community. Those series of themes and the quantitative data that was collected for the Wellbeing Survey was then brought back out to community and a community summit that was attended by more than 200 community members, again, organizations, individuals, cultural groups, and youth, who sat at the table to talk and hear and learn more about the vital conditions and about well-being and about what their community had said. Did we get this right? What, nuances, what do we still need to adjust? What voices might still be missing? If you'll hit the next slide for me, please. And they had begun with 6 themes, and what emerged for them in some consolidation was really 4 key themes: that all of our kids get off to a strong start, and additional conversations occurring today are what does that look like through the policy and investment of baby bonds, for example. Where we have an economy that works for all, recognizing, like in many other communities, there were those who were, doing well and had family businesses that had been passed down, and those with the loss of the manufacturing were in more service roles and things that were, more challenging for a livable wage. To share cultural spaces that connect. It's a region that is rich with music festivals and other food festivals and tremendous theater, but not everyone saw themselves in those things, and that's something they began working on. And most important to them, perhaps, at least as a starting point, is that they were a place where all belong. If you hit the next slide for me, please. One of the things that they found in the quantitative data is that nearly half of the communities who responded to the well-being survey showed that nearly half of folks were either struggling or suffering. And for a region that actually had a tagline of "We're Happy Valley," that was quite stark for folks. And as we've named sort of, the catalytic nature of some of these conversations, to make visible some of what was not visible to many who were, had the more traditional power purse strings and were setting policy. And they set out together to really begin with, as Monty shared with us today, that center, that essential vital condition of belonging and civic muscle that is a vital condition for all of us unto itself, and one that illuminates all of the other vital conditions. They, as you can see through a number of the photographs, they continued to host dialogues, right? That conversation is never complete. But those dialogues took on a number of other topics around racism, around policing, as it was around the time of the murder of George Floyd. Communities and businesses and community foundations began investing in local artists so that representation could be expanded, so that the walls of their buildings in downtown and through their communities could reflect straight black hair as well as kinky hair and and all of the richness and face of community. They have a rich Hmong community there in the region, and they began working in partnership to open the doors to be able to dance together, to be able to bring folks into the community market that is Hmong. And as a part of the initial conversation that began with community stewards who will be working toward, retiring and moving on, much of their conversation is, how do we create on-ramps and opportunity for youth and leadership in our region? And Monty and I saw the table that we started with, at the beginning of the process, looked very different 3 years into that process, with young people, people of color, people who were new to the area, as so many were folks who had grown up there. Just to put a final point on is, again, this work for them has been ongoing. The work here that I've talked about started coming up and into the pandemic. And one of the things that they realized coming into the pandemic, or as the pandemic hit, was that they were able to do things in a much more powerful way together because they had relationships in place that they never had before. And I'm reminded, Alex, of the story that you shared with Monty and I yesterday around your local food needs and that period of time where farmers had food that they could no longer sell at farmers markets, and there were, communities and farm workers who didn't have culturally appropriate food, and how those investments could shift those economies so that folks could get paid and folks could eat the things that were culturally relevant to them. That's what some of that work also looked like in Imagine Fox Cities. They've since done a second data collection for well-being and continue to create ways Monty and I were lucky enough to be with them about a year ago now, where they had a week worth of events. They called it their Strive to Thrive Week, and everything again from visits to the Hmong community market to neighborhood porch music and beyond.
Thank you so much, Stacy. We want to give you all an opportunity to discuss with each other some table questions. So thank you, panel, for speaking with us today. And I'm going to hand it back over to Monty, who's going to move us into our table questions. Thank you. Give it up for them.
Thanks, and thank you, Michaela. So I think real quickly, we just wanted to boomerang back to you all. I've had a number of conversations, some folks have come up, and just wanted you to have a few minutes to, what did you hear from the panel or any of these ideas that really stood out for you, that you'd like to bring forward as we collectively think about using data and measurement and story? What really excited you? And the second is, what would you like to see measurement of well-being achieve? Again, accent on this idea of achieve, catalytic. What is it that we think measurement might be able to help us to do? And would like maybe move forward. So going to give you about 8 minutes in your small group and just hear a couple of ideas. So go for it. So curious, we have just a few minutes if there's some ideas that are popping up for folks around measurement, things that you heard in the panel. Yeah, please, and if you would mind sharing your name, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm Joni, and I'm working with some population data. And one of the things I've noticed is that when you have small numbers, they get discounted. So if you have, say, a community where there's 3 or 4 folks who are, of a different race or whatever, we can't count those people, or because they might be identified, because it's a small numbers. So this whole small numbers things kind of bothers me, because I think then those voices get lost. So I don't know if anybody's kind of dealt with that issue, or if there's a resolution to that.
I just see a lot of heads shaking, and I think one of the reasons why these types of instruments, if we rely on them without understanding small area, there's some small area estimates. I don't want to answer your questions as experts, but the Hmong population, which was pretty small, that Stacy was sharing about, ended up getting their voices really elevated through storytelling and through getting level enough with smaller estimates where they could start to tell a more accurate picture of that, but mostly through voice. So it's a really good thought that I think taken into consideration. Please. And your name.
Hi, I'm Michael Villanueva from Compass Health. There's 2 points that I want to make today. When we look at data, data can be manipulated. And for a lot of minorities, they're very well aware that this data has been used to keep people down. So I believe very strongly in the importance of qualitative and quantitative data. You have to hear the qualitative part in order to understand it very well. The other thing is, I forgot what the other thing is. Now I remember what the other thing is. So I like the fact that we're looking backwards into the past. How did we get to where we are today? If you don't have that data at all, you gotta start somewhere. And if you start today, and then you start tracking it 2 years, 5 years down the road, then you get to see your pattern.
Thank you. Great points. Appreciate it. Other things that are kind of bubbling up for folks? Yeah, please. And your name.
I'm Ray. Something I wanted to mention is just being mindful of the fact that when we extract data from people who've been through trauma, like finding that way to do that in a way that doesn't continue to take from the person that you're asking for. That's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of sensitivities around how we use data not to exploit or oppress or cause further harm. Any other things that are bubbling up for folks? Yeah. I was just wondering, I haven't heard Ara's voice the whole time. I thought, wow, there's maybe something missing in this convening. Has she been silenced?
No, I'm working. This is the work. One of the things that really popped up for me was what JanMarie was saying about we have, and I'm calling it a reckoning, we have to reckon with those historical ruptures, right? Specifically when it comes to data. And since data has been utilized to exploit the knowledge, the expertise of marginalized communities. There's a lot of trust building that needs to be built. And for me, it's like, okay, well, what is the path towards rebuilding that trust? Because the reality is you can't not have the numbers. The numbers help keep our programs going. It helps us get the funding. It helps us collaborate. It helps us show the community there's a desire, there's a need, and there's a purpose for the work that we do. You can't get rid of the numbers. But equally important is like that qualitative data, that storytelling, that narrative. And I think that there's a couple of different avenues that we can move forward in utilizing. Okay, we're recognizing that in terms of numbers, in terms of data, there's been ruptures. Let's use that narrative, that power, the influence we have to elevate those stories from those communities. And then 3, 4, 5 steps down the line, find different ways of melding the two together. It's not one or the other. It can't be one or the other. We have to find ways and like, all right, here's us showing up. We're using our services. We're using our programs to show you we're rebuilding this trust. Thank you. Showing our appreciation, like thank you for sharing your stories, your data, your numbers, for filling out the surveys, whatever, what have you, right? And then pull it back in. And I think that's honest. It's one avenue. It's not the only avenue. Please, this is not definitive. But I think that there's a way of like us moving forward, and it has to start with how we provide our services, recognizing that like, yeah, we have, there has been harm caused. And again, building upon that trust of like, this is us using that data, and look, this is a program we created. Or like, thank you so much, we've shifted how we did this. So it meets your needs. We're uplifting obstacles. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, but we cannot discount the fact that we need both, because those are the systems that we work within. We gotta keep working within them, and then slowly but surely rebuild that trust and work upon the recognition and the reckoning of the historical trauma, and then the moving forward. So anyways, yeah, just wanted to share that.
Brilliant. I think that's a good note to land on. It seems like that's a common theme that's coming out, is how do we do both? How do we use data in a way that starts to build trust in ways that might be useful to the work that you're doing, Ara? And I know talking with Chris and team yesterday, how might they do it with their reentry and parish program? And how might it actually advance all the work that we're doing? Again, this idea of catalytic data, these are always going to be imperfect. There's always going to be problems with small area estimates and those types of things. But if they don't take us to changing the systems that underlie people's well-being, that everybody needs to thrive, then it's really just a fruitless exercise. So really excited about what you all might do together. And I think Matt is going to continue to host a communities of practice. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, maybe just a second. I promise this is the last you're going to hear from me, unless you come to my table at the Measuring Wellbeing Community of Practice. This is a conversation we're going to be continuing to have about how can we measure well-being in our region. How can we do more than just, ask a couple questions and put some numbers on a dashboard? And how can we really honor the stories that we're being trusted with? Because that's maybe my last point is it's such a responsibility to have someone tell you their story. If you're asking it to try and influence some sort of change, we need to honor the stories that we're getting, and it's a responsibility. So that's what we're going to be talking about at that community of practice table. You're more than welcome to